All right, welcome back. We're back in the garage after I've been away for about 2 months off of posting videos because I've been testing the XOT-1. So today I'm just kind of giving you a catch up of all the things that's been going on with the Buggy and how it's been performing. And so I last left you the 5th episode of the assembly series. And last thing I told you is we're going to get this thing out driving. And we did. And it just was one problem after another. Thankfully, all of those problems were not actually related to the car itself. Car itself performed great. I really like how this car's the ride height. It's very wide stance, and I was able to do some pretty good cornering in the backyard. And this thing is actually really fun to drive. Do some pretty when it's behaving correctly, which was all the problems in the last couple weeks have been in this area right here. All of the Predator 459 engine, the CVT clutch, and then the fuel system was probably the biggest headache. So about 2 weeks after we posted the last video, we had to wait for some good weather because here in Indiana we had some rain and cold and it was just nasty out. So after about 2 weeks, we finally got the car out and started driving around.
Well, you need that.
Drove really well until the engine started to heat up. We started discovering problems in our fuel issues. At the time, we had no idea what was going on. We would drive the car around, and when the car would drive around back to us, we would look at it, because usually it was my son driving. He was kind of our test driver during the day because he enjoyed that, and we were able to observe the car from third perspective. But when the car would pull back around, making a lap around the house, we would look at the car and realize that the carburetor was just pouring out gas at idle. It seemed like at any point when you would give it gas, it would stop dumping fuel out of the carburetor. Now, me and Chad were out there that day, and both of us, I have no idea how it escaped us, but we were just not able to figure out why it was doing that. And there's actually a video, we'll clip to that. Of the day that we were just kind of scratching our head like, what's going on with this car? It's just not running right. Because we were out there with screwdrivers chasing around this car, adjusting the carburetor, running it more rich, more lean. Let's try it with the air filter on or off, and just trying to do all these things with a fuel issue of it's driving sort of okay. It would sometimes it would die, or too rich, too lean, or really fast, then fall on its face and die. And it was a pretty long day of chasing the car around with screwdrivers, pull starting it because the battery was already dead at that point from trying to restart it so many times. And then after that, finally got my head on straight and started realizing exactly what was going on. And it was that the fuel is coming up to the engine via one of these pulse pumps. And what was happening, because we had it plumbed up in a very simple way where we had our vacuum line coming off the intake manifold and was sucking up fuel and then delivering it to the carburetor to the point where it was just overpowering the carburetor's float and not really stopping the flow, but just running the excess fuel right out of the carburetor. So the first thing I did, which the eureka moment for me was that I thought of the Honda Odyssey and how they use a one-way check valve to kind of give the fuel an alternate path, that whenever it's going to the carburetor, the excess would go through a one-way check valve and return back to the fuel tank, which is what we did. So if I untangle this mess. Oh, okay. So here is our fuel that's coming out of our petcock, going through a fuel filter into our pulse pump. And then this one is going to go to the carburetor. Any extra fuel there's too much pressure at the carburetor will go through this T in through this one-way check valve. So it allows the fuel to return back to the fuel tank. Going blank. Will allow it to go back to the fuel tank. And so that seemed to work out a little bit. And then the next time I had it out running, I got to a point where at a certain throttle, the fuel would just decide to not feed this as much at high throttle and would just dump back into here. So out of just kind of, let's just try it out, I put this clamp on here, and that seemed to reduce the flow of the return back to the fuel tank and help kind of regulate it, that it has less resistance to go to the carburetor than it does to return back to the fuel tank. So this goes back here to this Y, where here's our rollover check valve and our breather for our fuel tank. So after we got our fuel issues figured out, the car ran absolutely great. I was having a blast. I would say, comparing this to my Hayabusa powered Barracuda, I would say this is easily 1/3 of the adrenaline that a 200 horse monster buggy has. I mean, I was absolutely enjoying this. I ran this car for probably 12 laps at 100% throttle, and I was trying to get it to fail. Spoilers, it did. So that's where, after about, I don't know, maybe somewhere in there, I'd overworked the clutch to the point I burnt up a belt and had to change out the belt. And I actually I'm getting ahead of myself. I got to backtrack a little bit more before all of this. I actually did some clutch modification to this because the clutch was engaging too quickly at a low RPM, causing it every single time that I would shift into forward, neutral, reverse, it would grind the gearbox, or the FNR gearbox. So what actually helped me out with that was Redbeard's Garage has a really good video on Series 40 CVTs, and he did a stall kit, which went from, I think it was from the heavy weights to the medium weights, and then from the stock springs to the red spring, so that would stall the driver clutch so it wouldn't engage until 2600 RPM. And that was what I'm talking about was, and this, the driver clutch or the primary clutch. So that fixed it. That allowed it to, the car would rev up to a certain point before engaging, and the car just seemed to drive a lot more responsively after that. And it seemed to just go faster in general. Another thing I did to the clutch, the secondary clutch, was before I didn't really have it right. I just kind of threw in both red and green springs, hoping it could work. And it did work for quite a while, until after a little bit of research, I realized, because the orientation of my clutches and the way one was turned and the other one was facing the other way, I had to use a reverse sprung secondary spring. So that was the yellow spring. I got that off of Go Power Sports. So I threw that on there. All my clutch issues were solved. Now we'll go back to where we were on a really good run day. So after about making those 12 laps, the car was running really, really good, and I burnt up that belt. I changed it out. Everything was going good, but I started hearing a knocking sound, and I'm thinking, maybe it's just something easy like the clutch or something. Like maybe I didn't have something really tight or whatever. I'll just get that back in the garage and take a look at it. So I drove the car back into the garage. I take the clutch off there, started the engine, and I still heard that knocking sound. Now I'm thinking, oh no, this is it. I might have killed this engine. And so called Chad. I said, hey, let's come over here to my house. We'll get the engine pulled out of here and we'll dive into it. And I had a suspicion that because the sound came more from the crankcase than the top end, it was possibly the connecting rod. That was my theory. The other theory could have been because we did all these modifications to the engine where we deleted the governor, which raised up our maximum RPMs, and we did all these other modifications as far as more fuel and air, ported the heads, all this stuff, but we never did valve springs. That the possible issue is that we ran the engine so fast RPM that the valves were not able to close in time, and we had valve float, and the valves were not closing all the way, and that piston came up and strike the valve before it got a chance to close. That was one of my fears, but we'll get into it. So let's go over here and look at the engine that I got it all torn down. So Chad pulled this engine out in like an hour and then got the engine torn apart in probably another less than an hour. He's really good when it comes to pulling engines. I'm going to pull the camera over here. Okay, so I got the engine torn down, and we looked over at the head, and thankfully we can't find any major damage. So the valve float suspicions were false. There doesn't seem to be any issues with the valves or the piston head. Not saying we don't need those valve springs. We're definitely going to have to throw those heavier, I think it's a 50 or 55 pound valve springs in there so that that doesn't happen. But here's where the bad news is. Here's where we found out where the knocking sound is. Now on the 459cc Predator engine, there's a few parts on this that's unique some right now I cannot find parts for it. But they end up being the bad sound was if you look here on the connecting rod, it is heavily scorned and you can feel it. If we look at the crankshaft, it's not as bad, but you could definitely see and feel a little bit of scorning. And I think that knocking sound was that when the engine was together, you could grab the connecting rod, wiggle it back and forth, and it would slide on the crank as if there was no shims. And I'm sure there wasn't, but something had worn to the point where it's able to walk back and forth. So that's my theory of what the knocking sound is. So like I said, some of these parts on the 459 are unique. That's the trouble I'm having right now, is that the 459 is basically a 420cc Predator engine with a 3 millimeter longer stroke. And when Predator made all these improvements, because they made other improvements on the engine, they changed some of the parts, being a flat face piston, and the connecting rod, that is the culprit, has this double taper into it, which makes this connecting rod not compatible with the 420. Also, it's a stroker. It's a 3 millimeter stroker. So this connecting rod is actually shorter. So because of that, I don't somebody tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think I can just go out and get a 420 connecting rod and throw it in here and just not have the stroke because of this double taper. So that leaves me with a few options. I'm going to try to contact a couple of the local engine shops and see if they'll be willing to machine out this, put in some actual bearings because there's no bearings on this connecting rod, and retrofit this to actually have some sort of bearing that could be replaced if worn, and so on and so on. If I get a bunch of no's and every shop around here tells me no, then I could just put this engine back together and just run it into the ground and just let it die and get my 400 bucks I got out of it that I bought the engine for from Harbor Freight. The other options is buy another 459 and just have another one I can kill, or engine swap it. And I've got a couple ideas of what if I do engine swap it. I will either go down to a Predator 420 and then just build it to be as powerful or more horsepower than the 459, or I'll go up in size to like a Duramax 500cc. And this is all easy things to stay within the generator engine without, you know, changing the rear end and deleting the F&R box. But the other option is just to say, you know what, we don't need any of these generator engines. Let's just go with an ATV engine. Let's just delete the F&R box. We'll go to an ATV engine that actually has a attached gear transmission, and then just make the whole drive line a little more simpler. But what I don't like with that idea is that you're relying on used engines that you don't know their condition, rather than buying a new engine and knowing that it's brand new when you got it and there's no other problems with it until you create the problems. So that's where I'm at now. Whenever we do pick a solution and get either this engine repaired or another engine, I'll probably make another video kind of telling you, hey, this is what's going on. The car's back on the road driving again. And then to keep this whole series going, I'll make another video in the future, and we'll go back to the actual design of the car again. And because in the long-term plan is to drop the X in XOT-1 and no longer be an experimental model. So I will make a video going over the revisions that I've got planned to change on the chassis and the suspension, so that we can continue in the progression and get this car into something that is better and make it simplify some things so that other people can build OT1s. So here is all of the problems, and hopefully next time you see me, I've got more solutions and problems. So I'll see you whenever, the next video. All right, so welcome back. I've got a lot for you to catch up for you guys of what's been going on with me. What? Which sentence? Okay. Was it that bad? Did it sound that bad?
The words didn't connect to the sentence right, and I can't edit that.
But sometimes that's just going to happen, and they can make fun of me for my broken English.
Okay.